Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into the very building blocks of music, musical intervals.
Hmm.
We've got a fascinating source here, a chapter titled Intervals, the Distance Between Notes. And it really unpacks this, well, fundamental idea.
It really does. It's amazing how this seemingly simple concept, just the distance between two pitches, how it forms the actual architecture of everything we hear.
Yeah.
Understanding intervals really, truly unlocks a deeper level of musical comprehension, relationships, structure.
Exactly. And, if you think about wanting to grasp complex topics quickly, that's kind of what intervals offer in music.
That's a good
They
point.
give you this immediate handle on how notes relate, the essential framework for harmony. The source actually calls them the very fabric of harmony.
Oh, I love that quote. The warp and weft of the sonic tapestry. It's
It
beautiful.
really is, captures it perfectly.
Because they aren't just dry measurements, are they? They're the threads weaving those textures we hear.
Yeah.
So fundamental, but often kind of overlooked.
Yeah, people don't always think about them explicitly. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore this idea of distance. Sounds basic, right?
Hmm.
But there's actually a surprising amount of depth. We'll look at how we name them, what gives them their unique character, consonance versus dissonance.
And even the physics behind it all.
Right, the physics too. So let's dive in. How do we even start naming these musical distances?
Well, at its heart, an interval is simply the difference in pitch between two notes.
Okay.
And this can happen, when they sound together simultaneously.
It's harmony.
That's harmony, yeah. Or one after the other
Yeah.
successively.
Like in a melody.
Like in a melody. It's really the basic unit, isn't it?
And the naming system itself is quite logical. It's all based on the steps of a diatonic scale.
Mm-hmm. Like do rima.
Exactly, that familiar scale.
Yeah.
We basically use those steps as our ruler. So if you take a major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, the interval names just tell you how many steps you're spanning.
Precisely. The number tells you the quantity.
It's all
of
based
number
on the
of scale
steps of it.
degrees. But as the source points out, that number alone isn't the whole story.
Right, it doesn't tell you exactly how it sounds.
No, the precise character comes from what we call the quality of the interval. We'll get to that.
Okay, so first things first, let's walk through the basics. Unison up to octave, using C major, just like the source does.
Good idea.
First up, unison, or prime. That's just two notes, same pitch, C to C.
Identity reinforcement, as the source says.
Yeah, it feels like the same note.
And interestingly, even though there's no pitch difference we hear, it's still technically an interval, a 1.1 ratio, the most basic agreement.
Okay, then the second, like C to D. Just two adjacent notes in that scale.
Right. And it's important here, seconds can sound quite different. C to D isn't quite the same feeling as, say, E to F in that same scale.
Ah, because E to F is a smaller step, a half step.
Exactly. That hints at the quality thing we need to discuss.
Got it. Next, the third. Spanning 3 scale degrees, C to E. The source says these are crucial for chord quality, major or minor sound.
Oh, absolutely. The third is like the primary color of the chord. Gives it that bright feel or that darker, more introspective quality.
Foundational.
Then we have the fourth, C to F. Now, the source calls this perfect, but also mentions it has this interesting history. Sometimes felt less stable. Why was that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Historically, the perfect fourth's relationship with the perfect fifth was a bit ambiguous.
How so?
Well, fourth is kind of an upside-down fifth, right? C up to G is a fifth, G up to the next C is a fourth.
Okay, yeah, inversion.
Exactly. And since the fifth was considered super stable, the fourth, being its inversion, sometimes carried a bit of, let's say, implied tension by association, especially way back in early polyphony.
Fascinating. Okay, so after the fourth comes the fifth, C to G. The source calls this perfect and foundational. You hear it everywhere. Definitely. The perfect fifth, that simple 3.2 frequency ratio.
Yeah.
It's just a cornerstone. Resonates so naturally, feels strong, stable. You find that ratio in nature too.
Wow. Okay, next is the sixth, C to A. Like thirds, the source says these can be major or minor, and they add richness. They feel sort of fuller.
They do, yeah. Sixths often feel like a melodic expansion of thirds, a bit broader, maybe more lyrical. Adds a touch more complexity than a simple third.
Okay. Then we hit the seventh, C to B. Typically dissonant, the source says, creates tension, wants to resolve. You really hear that, like, yearning quality.
Yeah, that instability is the key. It's what makes it so useful for creating harmonic motion. It generates that strong pull towards something more stable, drives the music forward.
And finally, the octave, C to the next C up. 8 scale degrees.
Right.
And the frequency is exactly double, right? 2.1 ratio.
Precisely.
It really feels like completion, like coming
Right.
home, just higher or lower.
That 2.1 ratio is so pure, our brains almost hear it as the same note, just in a different register. A sonic echo, really. Reinforces the original.
And the source doesn't just stop there. It mentions compound intervals, too.
Right, intervals bigger than an octave.
Yeah, like the 9th, that's an octave plus a second. 10th is octave plus third. 11th octave plus fourth. 12th octave plus fifth.
And the cool thing is, they basically keep the character of their simple cousins. A ninth still has that secondness, that close tension, just spread out wider.
Right, makes sense. The source sums it up nicely, calling these names a sonic odometer.
Measuring the distance between 2 points in the musical space.
Yeah.
It's a good analogy.
Gives us a really useful framework. Okay, so we've got the names, the basic distances. Now, let's dig into what gives them their unique flavor.
The quality.
Right, the
Scale
quality.
degrees
This
and the
is what fine-tunes that basic size, adds that really crucial layer of detail to how an interval actually sounds.
And there are 5 main ones the source outlines.
Yep. Major, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished.
And we need to remember which numbers get which labels. Seconds, thirds, sixths, sevenths, those can be major or minor. Unisons, fourths, fifths, octaves, those are perfect. Correct. Then augmented means making a major or perfect interval a half step bigger. Stretched feeling.
Exactly. Stretched, pulled, often wants to resolve upwards.
And diminished makes a minor or perfect interval a half step smaller. More unstable.
Yeah, often feels compressed, unstable, wants to resolve downwards usually.
So quality is really about adjusting the precise number of semitones, right? Even one semitone makes a huge difference.
A massive difference. Totally changes the perception, the emotional impact.
The source uses C as a great example. C to E, that's a major third. Sounds, bright, open.
Assertive, yeah.
But lower that E,
Quality
just a half
right.
step to E flat. C to E flat.
Now that's a minor third. Darker, more mellow, introspective, perhaps.
Totally different vibe. And if you raise the
Well,
original
actually
E to E sharp,
sounds.
C to E sharp.
That's an augmented third. Sounds quite tense, doesn't it? Doesn't feel settled.
Not at all. And then it mentions C sharp up to E flat as a diminished third. That sounds really small and kind of crunchy. It does. It's a very compact, often unstable sound. So yeah, that C to E example and its variations really show how the number is just the start.
Just the frame.
Exactly. The quality is the essential modifier. It gives the interval its specific sonic fingerprint. Adds that shade of color, as the source puts it.
Love that. Okay, size and shade of color. Got it. Now, how do we actually perceive these? Consonant versus dissonant. What's the basic difference in how they hit our ears?
Well, consonant intervals, generally speaking, sound pleasing, stable, harmonious.
Restful.
Restful, yeah, agreement. The source connects them to simpler frequency ratios, which is key, and we'll get more into that.
Okay. And the source splits consonants into perfect and imperfect. What's the difference there in terms of stability?
Right. Perfect consonants, that's your unisons, octaves, perfect fifths, perfect fourths that are the most stable, rock solid. Simplest ratios. They've pretty much always been seen as constant across history and cultures.
Okay. The bedrock.
Pretty much. Then imperfect consonants is major and minor thirds, major and minor sixths. They're still pleasing, still agreeable, but just a bit less stable than the perfect ones. Their frequency ratios are a touch more complex.
A bit sweeter, maybe. Less stark.
That's a good way to put it. Sweeter, yeah.
So these consonant intervals, perfect and imperfect, they're basically the foundation of Western harmony, giving us that sense of resolution.
Absolutely. They're the sonic anchors,
Yeah.
the points of rest, the home base that everything else kind of moves around and resolves back to.
Gotcha. Now, flip side. Dissonant intervals. The source calls these tense, unstable. They create a desire for resolution. You definitely feel that push.
Yes, exactly. Dissonance creates that feeling of tension, maybe instability.
Yeah.
Our ears often expect it or want it to move to a more constant sound, and that feeling comes from their more complex frequency ratios. The sound waves don't blend quite as smoothly.
And which intervals specifically fall into the dissonant category according to the source?
It lists seconds major and minor. That close, often clashing sound makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Then sevenths, major and minor again. They have that really strong pull, that tension, and of course the famous tritone.
Ah, the tritone.
That interval right in the middle could be an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. The source even mentions its sort of historical reputation. Unsettling, ambiguous.
The devil in music.
Exactly. Though that's probably a bit overblown historically, it definitely has a unique, restless quality.
It really does. But importantly, the source points out dissonance isn't bad, right? It's actually essential.
Oh, completely essential. It provides contrast, drama, emotional depth. Composers use it deliberately to build tension, create conflict, generate that feeling of yearning.
Which makes the eventual arrival back at consonance feel so much more satisfying.
Precisely. It makes the resolution meaningful.
It's like the source says, adding spice to food or using shadows in painting.
Great analogy.
Without that tension, music could become, well, bland and predictable, as the source puts it.
Exactly. Dissonance is really the engine of harmonic movement. It creates the narrative arc, the friction that makes the resolution feel earned.
Okay, so we've got consonance, dissonance,
Yeah.
and you mentioned frequency ratios are key. Let's unpack that connection. Physics and perception.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating, how the physical world links up with our subjective experience. The source explains it clearly. Our perception of consonance and dissonance is deeply tied to the mathematical relationships between the frequencies of the two notes.
Simply math sounds better, basically.
In a nutshell, yes. Simpler frequency ratios tend to sound consonant, smoother. More complex ratios generally sound more dissonant, rougher. Think of it like gears meshing. Simple ratios, smooth fit.
Can you give us some of those specific ratios from the source?
Sure, the octave, which sounds so perfectly blended, has that incredibly simple 2.1 ratio.
Double the frequency.
Right. The perfect fifth, super stable, is 3.2. The perfect fourth is 4.3. Still simple, still consonant, maybe slightly less purely consonant than the fifth. Then the imperfect consonances. A major third is 5.4, a bit more complex, hence that sweeter quality maybe. And a minor third is 6.5. Again, relatively simple, contributing to its mellow sound.
And the source connects these simple ratios to the overtone series. How does that work?
Exactly. These simple ratios, 2.1, 3.2, 5.4, they correspond to the lower, louder overtones naturally present in a musical note.
Okay.
So when the fundamental frequencies have a simple ratio, more of their prominent overtones actually line up, they coincide.
Ah, so they reinforce each other instead of clashing.
Precisely. Creates sonic fusion, smoothness, like the sound waves share more common ground.
And the dissonant intervals, what are their ratios like?
They tend to have more complex ratios. The source gives, let's see, major seventh is 15.8, a minor second is 16.15. Much closer together, more complex relationship.
Right, not as neat as 2.1 or 3.2.
Not at all. And these more complex ratios mean fewer of the overtones line up neatly. Instead, you get more interference patterns, more clashing partials.
Which our brain interprets as roughness or tension,
Yeah.
dissonance.
That's the idea. It's this amazing interplay between the objective physics, the numbers, the overtones, and our subjective perception, how our brain processes it all.
Wow. It really is, as the source says, a cosmic dance of physics and perception.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
It's quite incredible how these fundamental building blocks have such a deep, almost scientific basis. We've really covered a lot here.
We have.
From naming intervals, understanding their quality, exploring consonance and dissonance, and even touching on the physics behind it.
And what's really striking, I think, is how this core idea distance relationship, which is so central to intervals in music, how it resonates way beyond sound.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. This concept of distance between things or the relationship between elements, how does that apply elsewhere? Understanding different viewpoints involves grasping the distance between them. Right?
That's a really interesting thought, like the relationship between cause and effect or different ideas.
Exactly. It makes you want to sort of actively listen for these kinds of relationships, these intervals in the world around you.
Yeah. Not just in music, but maybe in patterns in nature, or the rhythm of how someone speaks, the space between words.
Or even the space between ideas, like you said. It encourages a whole new way of perceiving connections.
A new way of hearing the world, almost.
Absolutely. These musical intervals, these seemingly simple measurements, they're truly profound. They're the fundamental particles of music's expressive power.
So maybe the takeaway for you listening is, next time you hear music, try to notice those intervals. Feel the stability of a fifth, the pension in a seventh, the color of a third.
It might just unlock a whole new layer of appreciation.
It really might. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive into the fascinating world of intervals with us.